So, Michelle, again, thank you so much for participating and coming on to our SETI YouTube channel, where we really highlight leaders like yourself that are really putting in the work. And, you know, this is something that everybody, I'm sure, will learn from, take notes, and see how this can be done for future generations. So, on behalf of SETI, we thank you again.
And yeah, we've been trying to organize this for a while, so I'm very much looking forward to finally getting to have a good, serious discussion with you.
Awesome, awesome. So, as always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please, if you can introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us a little bit about your remarkable work.
Well, thanks for prefacing my work as being remarkable. It's always good to hear that. So yeah, my name is Michel Frojmovic, and we've been talking to organize this session in the context of the work I've been doing with something called the Community Data Program, which is an initiative that really leads from behind in terms of equipping municipalities, community groups across the country with the tools to be able to better understand their own communities, where they've been, where they're going, be able to advocate for themselves, but doing it through that four-letter word, data.
And today, you know, in today's reality and world, data is so important, and people are really catching on to the fact that data is it's turning into money now. Basically, data is money. You know, data is a currency because it really helps us to understand challenges and things that are within communities. You know.
Well, and we see data as, it's a tough word, but as a form of truth. I mean, you know, statistics, you know, there's good statistics, bad statistics. Statistics can lie. Statistics can tell you whatever you want. But the fact is, there is something to be said for relying on numbers that are based on credible ways of collecting them, that give you a very objective, relatively objective understanding of what is happening and what has been changing, and really gets you to inject into the conversation that truth. And I say it's a difficult word because the fact is, if people are seeing data that doesn't tell them the story they were expecting to hear, they feel very empowered to ignore that truth and make up whatever they want. And if you say it enough times, it will become the truth. So, I mean, every survey I work with, there's limitations. You can't rely even on the census, which is a survey of 35 million Canadians, pretty big survey. Even then, you have to double check and question. But it's a pretty good starting point in my mind to work with statistics, with data, with evidence of what is actually happening, rather than what you hear is happening through social media or at a cafe or at home. Often that is reflected in people's very strong biases and other stuff they've heard from someone else. So I'm an introvert, bit of an antisocial person, and I do take comfort in immersing myself in the numbers, but understanding how those numbers relate to day-to-day reality. I mean, I'm not a hermit. So when I interact with people, understanding how the headlines sometimes can be misleading or not grounded in the truth is very, very satisfying for myself. But of course, our job is to get those numbers and understanding how the numbers, what they mean and how to work with them into the hands of thousands of people across the country.
Exactly, exactly. And if you can articulate your mission and vision for us.
I mean, I'll talk about the vision and the mission related to this program. Obviously, my life is bigger than the program, but I thought we would focus our conversation on the community data program. So the vision really is that organizations that are on the wrong side of having access to really strong data, strong, powerful data tools, really expensive licensed software, that we can work with those that don't have those tools and equip them with the same numbers, the same data, the same evidence that the most powerful individuals and departments and organizations have access to. So the vision is to work with, I mean, I said earlier, municipalities and community groups, but even within one municipality, even within the city of Toronto or the city of Montreal, there are some departments that are the have-nots of those municipalities. And I would say on the whole, we tend to work with the have-nots of those in the data access world. So how do we equip them? How do we equip community groups and bring them to a more level playing field when it comes to being able to argue with data? So that the vision is to enable communities across the country to equip them with the tools to measure and understand well-being at a very local level. And how we do that is by meeting with our members. It's a membership-based program. So we meet regularly with them. They have the questions, and then we try to translate those questions into a data table. So the question might be, what's going on in my community about a big topic in the headlines these days is immigration and housing. Well, what is the reality of the housing sector? What kind of incomes do recent immigrants have? What kind of housing are they in search of, and what's available? What does the data actually say? And then offer data, offer the tools to be able to understand the data, and then connect the different practitioners across the country grappling with this to talk to each other. So that's the mission. So data, building capacity, and networking.
Yeah, and I love that because it really cuts the fat out and the guesswork, bringing data to the table really cuts out a lot of that. So that's
Well,
amazing.
what it does is it goes beyond a political agenda. It actually allows you to equip yourself with a stronger, more compelling argument. Doesn't mean anyone's going to listen to you, but at least it gives you a better sense of what is the truth about demand for housing and blaming immigrants for a lack of housing, for example. What is actually going on?
Exactly. Exactly. And what inspires you about your work?
I mean, it brings together two elements of my DNA, I think. One is about helping people, and I mentioned my introverted nature, is to be able to quantify reality. How do you put numbers to reality? So if you see traffic in your neighborhood, or if you're hearing about more crime, well, what do the data actually say about crime today? How has crime been changing? I mean, crime is an interesting one because a lot of politicians like to get up and say, I'm going to fight crime because crime is out of control. And there was a point not long ago where crime had been declining consistently for decades. And talking about crime as your first and foremost priority really was ignoring other priorities that the data were revealing. So for me, it's a way to help people and to do it with a tool that gets gets you closer to the truth.
Exactly. Perfect example for that. And any challenges or any barriers that you faced in your work?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I mentioned that the truth is all relative these days. So one of the challenges is being able to equip people with data that actually makes a difference. And our challenge is finding out what difference did it make? I mean, we work with over 400 organizations across the country. They don't tell us on a regular basis what difference this is making. So one of the barriers is just knowing what difference we are making. But the biggest barrier really is the capacity of the have-nots in the data world to be able to work with data. I mean, they're not having access to data for a reason, and it's not typically just about a lack of funds, but it's a lack of data is complicated, and where to go for it, how to get it, how to interpret it, how to bring it into a format that's usable. Those are all things that you learn, and that is the single biggest obstacle, is that in most organizations we work with, they really have limited amounts of staff, of tools, of time to be able to use the data. So they know it's there, and they know that their reports, their proposals, their advocacy work would be stronger for it, but the time it takes and the tools it takes are something we try to bridge that gap, but it is a big challenge.
Definitely. Let's see that for sure. And so how do you feel about like the future of data collection, let's say in Canada? How do you feel about that?
I would say I mean, on the one hand, very positively. I mean, the ability to collect data from something like cell phones um, is just growing. The access to large data sets and the tools to be able to bring them into our world, something you couldn't do even 5 or 7 years ago. So there's a tool called Python, which is basically a way to automate manual steps. So if you can define 1,000 steps, um, even or 5 steps, but you want to follow those steps in 1,000 websites. I mean, that could take you days or months, or it wouldn't happen. But with Python, you can set up the code and you can extract this data. The code can take maybe a couple of hours to sort out. Then you run your laptop, you go home, you have a good sleep, and then in the morning you have hundreds of thousands of data sets that are at your fingertips from websites. So that those tools just didn't exist didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago in a way that was accessible to us. And increasingly, they're becoming affordable, a large set of talent out there to work with it, and being able to use it to do useful stuff. So I feel pretty good about it. On the other hand, that gap between the haves and the have-nots around data is just going to continue to widen and widen much more quickly. So data inequality is only going to grow, and I mean AI is one extreme form of that inequality. The ability to create a truth with AI is going to be in the hands of a relatively small number of people. It's not something that you need some skills to be able to generate, not a lot, mind you, but a certain set of skills that are unique, that are not easy to get. So data inequality will grow, but the potential for what you can do with it will improve. So I guess our job will be to try to keep that, that stretching our arms as far as wide as possible to try to keep that gap smaller rather than widening.
Exactly. I know, especially when you're referring to the AI world, it's there's still that gap that still needs to be filled on a human perspective.
I mean, AI is about data. It is about data.
Yeah, it's true. And okay, so what is the ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you in this field?
I mean, in the extreme, what would success look like? It would be that any community anywhere in Canada which has a mandate to deliver services locally and would benefit from having data, is able to answer their questions through data they acquire through the program. So whether it's about housing, whether it's about transportation, whether it's about poverty, whether it's about who is in need of food security services in what language, that they would be able to answer that question in minutes rather than have to guess what's going on.
Wow, this has been amazing. So do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action at this time?
Well, I think the onus is on us to reach out and let organizations know that there is a program out there that is designed to be able to have a conversation without using words like data. Just like what are you trying to do as an organization? What is your service? What are you trying to reach? What are your challenges? The onus is on us to reach out to them. Could be in rural communities, could be northern communities, could be in neighborhoods, in cities, and yeah, well, we hope over the next. I mean, we've been around in one form or another for about 25 years. So we hope over the next 25 that we'll do a much better job digging deeper and reaching wider.
Definitely, especially with the software that you said, can get that, like you said, while you sleep, you wake up and bam, it's there ready, right? So that's amazing. So Michelle, I really appreciate you again. On behalf of SETSI, we appreciate you. I've learned a lot, and I know others will learn a lot once we upload this onto YouTube. So as we began, we shall also we shall also end by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Michelle, we thank you again.